Welcome to the Lamb Radio Video Network. Again, this is Hakam Joe with the Petah Chamor podcast. And I'm happy to say this is our third show in a row. We have a regular slot here on Tuesdays at this time. So if you're interested, bookmark it, make a special note of this so you don't miss an episode. So last week we were talking about the role. We started to talk briefly about the role of Ishmael in the picture and the symbolism of Esau and Jacob. Jacob representing religious, observant Jews, pacifist Jews, peaceful Jews who live by the word of God, and Esau representing Hilonim, the secular Jews, the ones who have turned away from their birthright, the ones who have given up on the religion and who live by the sword. They put their faith in weapons and power of military power, military might, rather than putting their faith in Hashem, faith in God. And then I said how Esau, representing that kind of Jew, that kind of secularized Jew, is redeemed and brought back into the family, back into the good graces of the family through Ishmael. And it gave the example of the story, of course, when Esau has married Canaanite girls, and the Canaanite girls have caused him to fall out of favor with his parents. They don't like the wives that he's got. And in order to get back into the good graces of his parents, he marries Basmat Mahlat. She's called Basmat Mahlat in the book of Genesis, and she is the daughter of Ishmael. She's the sister of Nebiot. Nebiot is an interesting name as well. Nebiot means prophecy. It comes from the root Nabi, which of course is prophet, Navi. And Nabiot, this is Arabic, by the way, I should say Judeo-Arabic, because, of course, Ishmael is associated with the father of all the Arabs. We're all related in one big Hebrew family. Ishmael is the son of Abraham, the Hebrew. And, of course, Abraham's other son, Isaac, is also therefore Hebrew. Ishmael and Isaac are both Hebrew because their father, Abraham, was the Hebrew. And, of course, Isaac's two children, Jacob and Esau, are also Hebrew. But although he's a Hebrew, he's a different kind of Hebrew, Ishmael. Ishmael is a different kind of Hebrew, and that's the Arab family. The Arabs are our relatives. We call them Bnei Dodim, which means children of our uncles, Bnei Dodim. Cousins, basically, means cousins. So Ishmael's eldest son, firstborn son, that's really interesting. Ishmael's firstborn son is Nebiot, from the root word Navi, Nebi. In Arabic, Nabi means prophet. It also, of course, means Nabiot. Nabi could also mean somebody from Nabatea. It doesn't have to mean prophet, but it means somebody from that particular family as well, in Arabic or in Judeo-Arabic. Because in Judeo-Arabic, we would still say Navi for prophet anyway. So Nabi has a specific meaning, can be referring to someone from the tribe of Nabiot. And Nabiot is a plural form of Nabi, but it also means prophecy in general. That's interesting. Now, Ishmael is associated with a donkey. You know that. He's referred to as a donkey, a wild ass of a man. And his children are the domesticated donkeys. See, if Ishmael is a wild donkey, his children are more domesticated. They're the second generation. They're more Abrahamic. They're more inside the family. And the firstborn of Ishmael's donkeys was Nebiot. And that's actually what Petah Chamor means. It means firstborn donkey. So Petah Chamor, as firstborn donkey, it's quite an interesting thing, because in the Torah, in Judaism, only the donkey of all the non-kosher animals is holy enough to be redeemed. Only the donkey is holy enough to be redeemed. Oh, there are plenty of non-kosher animals, but the donkey is the non-kosher animal which is holy enough to be redeemed. And Petah Chamor, the firstborn donkey, will be redeemed, must be redeemed. That's a law of God, must be redeemed. Firstborn donkey must be redeemed. And the firstborn donkey, the symbol of the firstborn donkey is Nebiot, which is the firstborn son of Ishmael, and is also a word meaning prophecy, and refers to a very special nation. The nation of Nebiot never has any criticism against them at all. There's no criticism in it. It's very unusual, because you'll find there's criticism of every nation mentioned in the Bible. You know, the Philistines get a slap down. The Ammonites get a slap down. The Moabites get a slap down. The Sidonites get a slap down. Israel gets lots of slap downs. Even Judah gets a slap down. But for some reason, Nebiot doesn't get a single slap down. He's not criticized at all, anywhere in the entire Bible. And the girl who brings Esau back into the good graces of his family is the sister of Nebiot. She's referred to as the sister of Nebiot. Rather than being called the daughter of Ishmael, she's called the sister of Nebiot. It's very interesting, because it means it's linking her to him somehow. Perhaps like as they were, she could have easily been his twin sister, born at the same time. So she's referred to as the sister of Nebiot, making a link there. So, and what we see interestingly later is that the kingdom of Esau, or Edom, Edomia, becomes Nabatea as well. At first they had separate kingdoms, but in the end they become one kingdom. In the time of the Hasmoneans, the Hasmonean dynasty was the dynasty of Jewish kings which came to rule after the Maccabees had got rid of Epiphanius, the sort of archetypal Antichrist, in the story of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. You know Hanukkah, the story of Hanukkah, when the Maccabees sort of cleansed the temple and burnt the oil for 8 nights and days. And that dynasty, which came from the Maccabees, we call them the Hasmonean dynasty, was the dynasty which absorbed Nabatea and Edom. The country of Edom and Nabatea were absorbed into the Jewish people at that time. They were converted and made into Noahides. So I used that word up here before on this channel, Noahides. Noahides being the modern Anglo-Jewish, or you could say it's a European Jewish word. It's actually originally from French, Jewish word to refer to Gerim, the biblical Gerim. The biblical Gerim are the people who are not Jews by birth, who are not Israelites by birth, people from amongst the nations who are called by God's name and are grafted in to the people, of Israel. They're grafted into the of Israel. So these non-Jews who are grafted in to us are called Noahides. And in the time of the Hasmoneans, the kingdoms of Edom and Nabatea, which is the same place actually at that time, was absorbed, was grafted in to the kingdom of the Hasmoneans, to the Hasmonean kingdom, which is very interesting. And they were converted by the Hasmonean king, but he didn't convert them to Pharisaical Judaism properly. Some of them, there was more than one king who did this actually. There were a few kings who converted Nabatea, absorbed them into the Jewish kingdom. But not all of them converted Nabateans correctly. And this is just in the centuries before Jesus of Nazareth came along. A century before Jesus of Nazareth came along, this kingdom was absorbed, was brought in, and they were called freedmen. The way in which they were, the king sort of converted them and made them part of the people of Israel was through a sort of halakhic loophole, where he enslaved the entire population and then freed them instantly. And when you are a freed slave in Judaism, you become part of the Jewish people. You have a special term called Meshu Hararim or Hararim. It's a special kind of Jew, which means that they descend from somebody who was liberated, a slave who was liberated by the Jews. When the Jews liberate the slaves, those slaves become Jews. But they're a special kind of Jews called Meshu Hararim, or freedmen. The synagogue of freedmen. The synagogue of freedmen. It's very important to remember this synagogue of freedmen. Herod the Great was actually of the synagogue of freedmen. But also you might remember that Paul of Tarsus was of the synagogue of freedmen too. And he was from the tribe of Benjamin, meaning that he had been liberated inside the tribe of Benjamin, but he was part of that synagogue. He's from the synagogue of freedmen, meaning Meshech Harabim, meaning that he had some Nabatean connection. That's really interesting. So he had a Petach Chamor connection because he was the firstborn donkey. Okay, right? As Nabatea is the firstborn donkey. So Saul of Tarsus, being from the synagogue of freedmen, had a Petach Chamor, that is firstborn donkey, that is Nabatean, Nabiot connection, which wasn't missed by our rabbis. Our rabbis actually, Jacob Emden, for example, writes specifically about Paul of Tarsus's role, continuing the tradition, which we call in Judaism the Petach Chamor tradition, which Rashi refers to, and the students of Rashi refer to. The Tosafists also refer to this Petach Chamor tradition, which is the firstborn donkey tradition, which is the Nabiot tradition, or the Nabatean tradition, if you like, the tradition of the firstborn donkey. And in this tradition is where you're going to find, it's literally the only place you are ever going to find reference to what you would consider to be usually Christian teachers as halakhically Jewish and righteous saints among the Orthodox Jewish community, specifically Simon Peter, Paul of Tarsus, John is mentioned. There are several who are mentioned by name specifically, and there's more than one Simon as well. There's Simon Klopas. He's a very important one. Simon Klopas, might remember Shimon Klopas. We call him Rav Shimon HaKalpus is the phrase we give to him, and he's also called a Petach Chamor. And all of these saints, these Christian saints, these early first century Christian saints, these Jewish founders of the Christian movement, Messianic movement, you would usually consider to be non-Jews, or people might be considered apostates. Who thought, oh, they've abandoned Judaism, right? Because that's what you associate them with. You associate them as sort of people who abandoned Judaism, because that's the way we are sort of led to believe. The attitude we're supposed to have towards Christians is like something's wrong with Christianity. It's not true Judaism. It's some kind of wrong religion. And so you'd think that these first century Jews who are associated with the foundation of Christian faith must also therefore be apostates or lost Jews. Not at all. No, not so at all. They are actually regarded as saints, tzaddikim, righteous ones. If you want an evidence about this, for example, have a look at Yehuda HaHasid's Sefer Hasidim, Siman number 191. And there you see a reference to Simon Peter, saying that this man is a righteous man, but because his people who follow him don't understand his teachings correctly or have misfollowed him, they follow him wrongly, we have to refer to him as Petach Chamor. So we kind of have this kind of joke pun on his name to sort of what we call nullify the idol. There are Christians in the world who worship him. They pray to him. They make prayers to Simon Peter, and they ask him for help and various things like that. And that's not really permitted. When Gentiles do that about a person, it usually means they've deified them. They've made them into gods. But this man, Simon Peter, was a righteous man, a righteous teacher in Israel. Rashi refers to him as a righteous teacher in Israel. The Tosafists refer to him as a righteous teacher in Israel. Jacob Emden refers to the same school as righteous teachers in Israel. He is mentioned, by the way, in not only in the Telia, which is a Baraita we talked about last week, but he's also mentioned in Kuzari as a righteous teacher. The Kuzari is a book about the conversion of non-Jews to Noahide Judaism, which was written, 1,000 years ago. It's a very, very old book, Al-Kuzari, Hakuzari. Al-Khuzari is the Arabic version of it. And we have also got the Mahzor Vitri. The Mahzor Vitri also mentions Simon Peter. The Mahzor Vitri is by Rabbeinu Simcha, who was a student of Rashi. In the Mahzor Vitri, it says that he is attributed, the Nishmat Chaim prayer is attributed to him, and Rabbeinu Simcha says you mustn't regard him as a Nabal, because that is an error of Rome. And if anybody says about him that he's Nabal, that they will have to bring a big fat offering when the Messianic era comes, when Messiah comes. They'll have to bring a big offering as a sin offering for their mistake. So he says, Chas v'shalom, may nobody say such a thing in Israel, that Simon Peter was Nabal. Okay? And that's in the Mahzor Vitri. That's very important. And then who else do we have? You've got the in the Siddur Avodas Israel, you have a statement saying that Yehuda Bar Yaakov said that Simon Peter wrote the Nishmat prayer, which we use for Yom Kippur. There are plenty of examples. I mean, there are too many examples really to list. There are plenty of examples about Simon Peter as being a righteous Jew, and the other Jews who were like him, who were found. And Rashi himself mentions Yohanan, for example, John, and Simon Peter. That there was these Jews who were regarded as responsible for the foundations of the Christian faith. Are all of them regarded as saints in Judaism? You thought, well, how can they be saints if Judaism thinks that Jesus of Nazareth is a bad guy, right? Because that's what a lot of people say. They say Judaism, Jews, they hate Jesus of Nazareth. They think Jesus of Nazareth is a bad guy. But I told you before, I said that there's more than one person called Jesus, and the Talmud. The Talmud discusses the Baraita, which we're talking about here. And in that Baraita identifies specifically these Jews as working to correct the mistake of a son of Miriam Magdala, Mary Magdalene, Miriam Magdala. They're correcting the mistake of a son of Miriam Magdala, who Mary Magdalene, named after her teacher. She named her son Jesus Nazarene Jesus, after her teacher, Jesus of Nazareth. So there's more than one Jesus in Jewish tradition. Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua min Natzrat, Rebbe Yeshua min Natzrat. We don't have any criticism against him at all. There's none. But about Mary Magdalene's son, who is called Nazarene Jesus, Yeshu Notzri, well, we have a lot of criticism of him. He's like the equivalent of like the Antichrist in Judaism. He's the big bad guy. But the name sounds the same. Nazarene Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, same person, right? Who cares to go into the details? Who believes in the Talmud? Well, I believe in the Talmud. And you should believe in the Talmud too, because the Talmud is what tells us that the mother of this wicked Jesus was Mary Magdalene. He presented himself as a Gilgul, that is a reincarnation of Mary Magdalene's teacher, Jesus of Nazareth. He had the same name, so he presented himself as a reincarnation of him, and he led people astray. We have a lot of stories about him. In the Christian world, they refer to him as Simon Magus, or a student of Simon Magus. Simon Magus is actually his teacher, but a student of Simon Magus who continued in this tradition and led to the establishment of what the Christians call the Gnostic schools, or Luciferianism. Luciferianism is the idea that that Hashem, God, is actually evil. Chas v'shalom, chas v'chalila. That's what they say. That's what Gnostics say, that he's actually evil. The one who revealed the Torah at Mount Sinai is actually evil. And that the devil, the serpent in the tree of knowledge of good and evil, is actually the good guy trying to save you from the evil, wicked Hashem. Chas v'shalom. And that this devil, the serpent, came into the earth as Yeshu Notzri, who they want you to believe is Jesus of Nazareth. And many people think that Yeshu Notzri is Jesus of Nazareth. And so they think that, okay, so there is this sort of antichrist person in Judaism. There is this antichrist person in Judaism who is called Yeshu Notzri, the son of Miriam Magdala, Mary Magdalene. But who cares about the Talmud's details, right? They just forget the details. Well, I'll tell you, the devil is literally in the details, as in, if you forget the detail, you are following the devil. And the detail in this case is, this particular Jesus we're talking about is the son of Magdalena, Magdalena's son. Anyway, the Baraita tells us that these righteous Jews, Simon, Peter, Shimon Kepha, and Yohanan, and there's also Yehuda as well. These righteous Jews, and Paul of Tarsus as well, Simon Klopas, there's a lot of them mentioned. These righteous Jews who were followers of Magdalena's teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, Rebbe Yeshua Minatzrat, they were commissioned by the Sanhedrin itself, the Sanhedrin which had been reconstituted in Yavne after the destruction of Jerusalem. They were commissioned by the Sanhedrin itself to create a religion in order to correct the mistakes that had been spread by Magdalena's son. And the religion they created turned into Christianity. But what it was originally was nothing but Messianic universal Judaism, or Messianic Noahide Judaism. That's the religion. That's our Baraita. That's in the Telia. This book, the Telia, was available in any synagogue. You could get it in any synagogue up until the Holocaust. Any Central Asian synagogue, Central European synagogue, any Ashkenazi Central European synagogue had this Telia up until the Holocaust. And I don't know if you know, but you should know, and it's important to know, that the Nazis who put us into the Holocaust, who killed us, who tried to eliminate us, were all of them a Gnostic sect of Luciferians, the Thule Society. And they have an idea that the Jesus that the Christians must worship must not be the Jewish Jesus of Nazareth that we say, his students were righteous. They say that you must worship Magdalena's son and the bloodline that comes from that boy, because he had a bloodline. And they claim that the Merovingians and the Carolingian dynasty of Europe have descent from this bloodline of Yeshu Notzri, Magdalena's son. There was a whole movie made about it. The book was called The Da Vinci Code. And this man was basically making reference to this sort of strange Luciferian Gnostic cult, kind of a sex cult, where they actually regard the act of conceiving children in this Yeshu Notzri bloodline to be a form of worship. And they all stand around watching the conception. That means they stand around watching sex, praying while this happens. This is an evil cult. But this is nothing. This is not just a fantasy story from the Da Vinci Code. This is something which has been written about by too many people throughout history. And we've known that. The Jews know that. But when the Holocaust came along, Jews, our religion was pacifist. We had pacifist people. To the Holocaust, there was no militant Judaism in existence. After the Holocaust, now you've got this militant Judaism where people put their faith in the sword rather in the word, rather than Hashem. And it's because the Holocaust was designed to sort of trigger us and push us over the edge so that we would become violent, aggressive, militant people when we are actually people of shalom. But the reason why they did this was, it's a code that you might not understand how satanic the Holocaust is. I mean, on so many levels, you're like, oh yes, it's obviously satanic. but on so many levels, it's a kind of a witchcraft that they try to do to destroy the Jewish mentality and literally change us, reverse us, turn us inside out from being pacifists to being militant. And they want to destroy our knowledge concerning Magdalena's son. And they burned all of our books. They went into every synagogue they could, or every yeshiva, every place of Jewish learning, every Jewish house, and they took all of our books about this and burned them. They burned them in the streets. They had to have parties burning the Jewish books, anything that was referred to this, so that only the Nazi propaganda concerning this Baraita would remain. And unfortunately, we are still suffering to this very day. Ashkenazi Jews are still suffering from the fallout of that book burning until this very day, where you have people still spreading the same old anti-Semitic, Nazi, anti-Semitic, Thule Society, Gnostic Luciferian propaganda against the Jews, to the point that we even have young Jews who believe this and are happy to embrace this because they haven't had a proper full Jewish education. They are secular Jews, they are Esau as opposed to Jacob, and they are embracing the negative propaganda against us as a pacifist people, and they're accepting it as a real thing. And we are suffering today, sadly, we're suffering. But as I said, my Judaism was not affected by the Holocaust. I continue the same Judaism which existed before the Holocaust. That is the Judaism of Jacob Enden, of the Tosafists, of Yehuda HaHasid, the Sefer Hasidim, of Rashi, the 1,000-year tradition. I continue that tradition, and I'm trying to bring that to people's attention. And that's what the Petach Chamor podcast is really all about, to talk about all the ins and outs concerning this. I hope you've watched the other 2 episodes so that you have a background for this, so you can see where it's coming from and how it applies with all the Torah portions we've been looking at. But today it's time to talk about that continuation, the Petach Chamor as the firstborn donkey, and where it comes from, how it continues all the way from Nabatea throughout history to this present day. And it starts with somebody called Shimon ben Shetach. Now, you might know about the conflict between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. You might know about the Hillel-Shammai conflict. For example, over Hanukkah, and Beit Hillel, we light the candle. You've got 8 candles you light each night. And in Beit Hillel, you light the candles 1 on the first night, 2 on the second night, 3 on the third night, 4 on the fourth night, all the way up to 8 at the end, as the light of the miracle is getting brighter as it goes along. That's Beit Hillel Halakha. That's the minhag of Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai is the opposite. You start with 8 and you reduce them one by one as the days go by. Okay, that's Beit Shammai. But this conflict between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai goes back to somebody called Shimon ben Shetach, who represented the Pharisees, and Judah ben Tabai, who should say Shimon Shetach represented the Pharisees and the scribes. That's the most important thing I should have said, the scribes, the ones who believe that we should write down our Torah Sheba El Peh, the oral Torah. That's what Shimon ben Shetach's schools are all about. And that resulted in the Talmud eventually. First the Mishnah with Judah Hanasi, and then eventually the Talmud came out of it, both Talmuds, the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, roughly, and then the Midrashim, and all the tradition of writing down our oral tradition, that practice, that system, that way of recording our oral tradition and writing it down. This is from the school of Shimon ben Shetach. And the other school, which is that we shouldn't write down the oral Torah, we should keep it as an oral thing, and it's not right to write it down. That's what they call the school of Shammai, which tends to be more pshat. Pshat means simple reading, or sola scriptura type reading of the Torah, and that is the halakha. The halakha is based on the sola scriptura reading of the Torah. And that goes back to somebody called Judah ben Tabai. So Shimon ben Shetach's yeshiva is the yeshiva or school tradition, is the school of the people who are all in with the idea that we should record our oral Torahs, that we should write down the Baraitas, that we should discuss the Baraitas, that we should cover the whole thing, right? That's the Shimon ben Shetach school, and that is the school which is associated with the Petach HaMor tradition. The Petach HaMor tradition comes from that school. The Petach HaMor tradition does not exist in Judah ben Tabai's school. Interestingly enough, Judah ben Tabai's school is associated with the Karaites and the Sadducees. Sadducees and Karaites today are indistinguishable from each other, but originally there was a distinction between the two. First, it was the Karaites, and gradually the Sadducees, who have no oral Torah. Karaites have oral Torah, but they don't write it down. They're not supposed to write it down. Eventually, I think 1,000 years ago, they started to write it down, and the Karaites have some books in existence, which is like a new Talmud. One of their important teachers was Anan ben David, Anan ben David. Anan ben, it's funny, you call them the Ananites, which actually has got a very negative meaning if you understand that. Anan. But the Ananites have this this sort of new Talmud, which was written only 1,000 years ago, which is all that they barely remember of the oral tradition. Eventually, despite their conflict with the rest of the Pharisees for more than 1,000 years, that they should never write down the oral Torah, eventually, 1,000 years ago, they started to write down what they remembered of the oral Torah, and it wasn't much. It was very little. And so the Karaite oral Torah, being such a thing, is generally disregarded, I should say, by Karaites. In fact, Karaites say, well, I thought the whole point of us was not to have a written oral Torah. So most Karaites ignore the written record of the oral Torah among the Karaites. But what we do learn from their books is that those guys, they say themselves, they actually love Yeshunatsu. They actually love Magdalena's son. They actually love Magdalena's son. And they promote the sola scriptura understanding of the Bible because it allows them to influence people who are not aware of the Petach HaMor tradition, which is the correct Pharisaical and scribal way to understand Jesus of Nazareth. And according to this tradition, Esau can only be brought back through the influence of Ishmael. And Ishmael, of course, meaning the daughter of Ishmael, the sister of Nebaioth, refers to what we call Hagerim. Okay, and you say, oh yes, from Hagar, right? Yes, well, Hagar is spelled exactly the same way as Hager. Hager was translated as proselyte, or migrant, or pilgrim, or sojourner. There were different ways that were translated it. Sometimes they translated as stranger, strangers who are within your gates. Ger asher b'sha'arech. These are the people from amongst the nations who are grafted in to the Hebrew people and are symbolized by Ishmael. And the idea is that through these nations who are grafted in, we can retrieve the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The lost sheep of the house of Israel being Esau. Esau is the symbol of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And also, in time, Edom became the symbol of Christians as well, because Christians, rather than following the scribes and the Pharisees as Jesus of Nazareth told them to in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 23, verses 1-2, he says the scribes and the Pharisees sit in the seat of Moses, so do and observe everything they tell you whatsoever to do. Whatsoever they tell you to do, do and observe it. And don't try to copy Judaism the way they copy it, but the way the scribes and the Pharisees copy it. Because if you try to copy the Judaism the way the scribes and the Pharisees copied it, it's too much. It's too difficult, and nobody's going to lift a finger to help you. And even though we come across as keeping all of the laws, which we say, oh, it's too much for you, too much for you, even though we come across keeping it, even though, in fact, we don't keep all of those laws. And in honesty, it's very difficult to keep all of those laws. In all honesty, you can't say, oh, I've never broken any of those laws. Out of a principle of embarrassment, you're supposed to say, no, I don't. You're not supposed to admit to it or add up to it. But in all honesty, you couldn't say, I have managed to keep all of those laws. I've done very well. You couldn't do that because there's too much. What you understand is, as in Pharisaical Judaism, is that you do your utmost. You do your best. You study and you do your utmost. And by studying these laws again and again and again, you show that you love these laws, even if you fail to live up to them all the time. But that's really no good to convert somebody to say, oh, come and convert to our religion, come and practice, come and learn about all of these laws that you're never going to be able to keep. And we don't do that. So what we're supposed to do is say, if you want to do Judaism, don't do it as a Jew. Don't convert to Judaism as a Jew, Accept Judaism, yes, but accept what we call Noahide Judaism. Judaism for the nations. That's the kind of Judaism you can do. It's 7 laws. It's very, very little. Just 7 laws. That's not much. And anybody can manage those 7 laws. And so that's what Jesus means when he says to his disciples, to the crowds, to the Christians who are following him, to his disciples, he says, do and observe everything that the scribes and the Pharisees tell you to do. That's only the 7 laws of Noah. Do the 7 laws of Noah is what he's saying. Be good Noahides. I want you to be good Noahides. I don't want you to go and be good Pharisaical scribal Jews. You don't have to do that. That's actually, frankly, impossible to keep all of those laws perfectly. And we have some people who try it. You think that they're doing it. We have some people. It's sad to say, but I've actually sat next to some people on the plane who've almost like wrapping themselves up inside of a plastic bag so that they don't get contaminated by anything on the plane, because they think that this is the way to be tahor, forgetting totally that that's why we have mikvah. All right, so you can be tahor. You don't have to worry. You can go and use the mikveh. That's how you can be tahor, right? Anyway, it's tough. And you're not supposed to copy us. And you're not supposed to do it the way we're supposed to do it. Do not do as they do. Do what we say. What is it we say? We say, do the 7 laws of Noah. Be good Noahides. So, Jesus said to his disciples, I have not come except for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, which means those people symbolized by Esau, the apostates, the seculars, those who've turned away from their birthright. I haven't come except for those, Jesus says. And then he tells the crowds, do the Noahide Judaism as the scribes and Pharisees tell you to do. And he says to his disciples, go and baptize all nations in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Go and baptize all nations and make disciples out of all nations. In the name of Hashem, his Son, the Messiah, and the Ruach HaKodesh, which is the power of God. So he says, I've come only for the lost sheep. And then he says, go and baptize all nations. I mean, what's going on here? Is some kind of hypocrisy, some kind of crazy? Is he mad? Not at all. Not at all. He's actually doing what our sages say must be done in order to retrieve the lost sheep of the house of Israel, based on that Torah portion where Esau, in order to get back into his parents' good books, marries a daughter of Ishmael. And Ishmael is the symbol of Hagarim. His mother is Hagar. Hagar is Hagar. We say in Judaism that Hagar was actually Keturah. We say that Abraham's wife after Sarah, Keturah, was Hagar, and that Hagar is just another way of saying Hagar, meaning the proselyte, meaning the Noahide. So her title is the Noahide, That's her title. But her name was Keturah. That's what Orthodox Judaism teaches. We actually teach this. And it's like, whoa, that seems to be a contradiction because some of the verses in the Bible don't seem to add up with what you're saying. It's like, well, go and read Rashi's interpretation of those verses and you'll see that it all makes perfect sense. But you need to know the oral Torah. Otherwise, some of these verses do seem to not make sense. But that's the problem of taking a pshat, that is, sola scriptura, approach to the Bible, especially the 5 books of Moses. If you take this pshat, sola scriptura approach, you're missing out on so much. And you can never, honestly, you can never understand the Bible except as a Sadducee if you read it like that, because that is the way the Sadducees read it. And Jesus did not say, obey the Sadducees and the Karaites. He said, obey the scribes and the Pharisees. So you've really got to know how to read the Torah as the scribes and the Pharisees in order to understand how to follow it. So Ishmael is the symbol of all the nations who are called by God's name for the purpose of redeeming Esau, who is the apostate lost sheep of the house of Israel. You see? That's the Petach Chamor tradition. That's the Petach Chamor tradition. That's what I try to teach, that I've been on here talking about for the past few weeks. And I've explained the meaning of the concept Petach Chamor today. And as I said, this was passed on by, well, as I said, it's down in the school of Shimon ben Shetach. It comes down in the school of Shimon ben Shetach. At first, see, this boy, the son of Miriam Magdala, who tried, by claiming to be the reincarnation of Jesus of Nazareth, okay, he was claiming an authority and a position of high birth as well. And he was claiming what came to be known in Christendom as the divine right of kings. In fact, he's the founder of this concept of the divine right of kings, that the king, the one who's born in this line, can do no wrong, and he doesn't have to keep the law. Now, in Pharisaical Judaism, for the scribes and the Pharisees, the kings must obey the law. It's like a constitutional monarchy that we have. We don't have just a monarch in Judaism. We have a constitutional monarch. And that means the monarch must obey the laws, must follow the law, and is not above the law, but it's under the law. Whereas the scribes and the Pharisees, without the oral Torah, claim that the king is above the law. Now, the Messiah for us is the law. The Messiah is the law, okay? So the Messiah doesn't go against himself. He is the law, okay? It's like that Judge Dredd, I am the law. Jesus, if Jesus is the Messiah, he is the law. He is the law. So he doesn't undermine himself. He just clarifies himself for you. But the position of those who believe in a divine right of kings say it doesn't matter. Jesus is not interested in the law. He couldn't care less about the law because he's above the law. But this teaching is not anything that Jesus of Nazareth said. This is exactly what Magdalena's son said instead, who presented himself as the reincarnation of Jesus of Nazareth. According to Baraita, according to the Talmud, that's who he is. He's not a reincarnation, but he presented himself as such. And by doing so, undermined and corrupted the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth for the church, for the Christian church. Which is why it's necessary to get back to a Judaic understanding of Jesus of Nazareth in order to escape from the corruptions which have been brought in by those churches which follow the tradition of the divine right of kings. And think about how much evil has been done on the planet as a result of the divine right of kings. I'm very happy that I'm presenting this to audience in North Carolina, hopefully all around the world, but North Carolina too. In North Carolina, you will understand that how evil the divine right of kings was, because you had your war of independence against a very wicked king of England. And you, Baruch Hashem, gained independence from that. But as for those in the Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth, they have always had to maintain this idea that there's something special about that royal family. They have some holy bloodline, which we have to respect. And it's correct to bless our leaders and pray for them to be guided. Pray for God to give them guidance, to bless them with understanding. So that, Be'ezrat Hashem, please God, one day, they might wake up out of this and say to everybody, you know what, I don't have any divine right as a king. God bless Harry for stepping out of that. Prince Harry stepped out of that with Meghan Markle. It's a difficult thing. And he's got a difficulty in his life because he was brought up with a silver spoon in his mouth, and it's very difficult for him to adjust to a normal life. And he's not finding things which you and I would find easy. He's not finding them easy because he doesn't have the benefit of a normal upbringing. But God bless him for coming out of that. It's not easy. And if only all of them would come out of that too. Because this sort of European royal families, these kings and queens of Europe, as I say, I'm very happy that I'm speaking to an audience in North Carolina here, because the king, and in the United States of America in general, because the kings and queens of Europe have got a lot of blood on their hands simply because of this concept of the divine right of Christian kings, which comes from their ultimate belief of the Carolingian dynasty, the first sort of Holy Roman Empire, dynasty of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Merovingians with them, who believed that they descended from Mary Magdalene and her son, who they say was the son of Jesus. No, he wasn't the son of Jesus. He was the son of Yossel Pondrick, somebody called Yossel Pondrick, a Roman soldier. And you might have heard people saying, oh, Jesus of Nazareth, he was the son of a Roman soldier. It says so in Celsius. Celsus says so. Celsus, he's a Roman philosopher. He was a big critic of the Christian church. He's backing us up. He's backing the Jews up. He was talking about Magdalena's son, the son of Yossel Pondrick, the Roman soldier, who sadly also was a member of Jesus of Nazareth's family. In fact, he's mentioned in the Bible. They called him Joses, Joses. Yossi, that's my name, Joe. I know about this because when your name's Joses, you're like, well, who else is called Joses? You have a look about it. You read it. You learn about these things. Baruch Hashem, because I have that name, I learned about it. But that Roman soldier was a wicked man. He wasn't a good member of Jesus of Nazareth's family. And he's supposed to have raped Mary Magdalena. And Magdalena's child was named after Magdalena's teacher in the hopes that her child would grow up to be a better person than his rapist father. Sadly, Joses sounds a lot like Joseph. And since Joses, the father of the wicked Yeshu Notzri, sounds like Joseph, the earthly father of the holy Tzaddik Yeshua Minatzrat, since they sound the same, that's where the confusion comes from. And people are still attacking Jews to this very day because of this misunderstanding. But the Petach HaMor tradition clarifies all of this. It explains all of this in detail, so you understand exactly where the misunderstandings have come from. You understand exactly how to understand the New Testament. You understand exactly how to understand the Telia. And you can see through the Nazi propaganda, which they call the Toledoth Yeshu. You might have heard about the Toledoth Yeshu. Toledoth Yeshu is it's actually an anti-Semitic attack against the Baraita that I've been talking about, written by apostate Jews who left Judaism 300 years ago, 200 years ago, 400 years ago, and wrote what they barely remembered of this Baraita in such a critical and Judaism-hating way that it made other people believe that we have something very wicked that we would say about the founder of this Messianic Noahide movement. But if you read, as I said, if you read Rashi, if you read the Tosafists, if you read Jacob Emden, if you read Rabbi Harvey Oscar Falk, you will find that we have nothing critical to say about that. That is nothing but Nazi propaganda. And that is what they tried to promote during World War II, why they tried to kill so many of our teachers, and why they burned our books to hide and bury this, because they're Luciferians. And that's undermining their religion, that they want all Christians to be members of these Luciferian Gnostic cults. The Aryan nations in the United States of America, that's exactly the same. They are the continuation of this. And unfortunately, you will find that that sort of doctrine has polluted many, many of the Christian churches. But Baruch Hashem, look at this. For the first time in history ever, I'm able to come on a show and talk about this sort of thing openly for the whole world to hear. This has never been possible in history. When we did something like this, there would be a pogrom against us. The Nazis had a backlash against us. There were Crusader knights who practiced on the Jews before they went to kill Muslims in the Holy Land. We had the Chelmitsky uprising. It's been non-stop for 1,000 years. But somehow, throughout that 1,000 years, we've managed to get this story more and more well-known. Slowly, slowly, to the point that we're having... And nobody's going to arrest me for talking to Christians about this today. Wow, what a position of strength. And this is after the Holocaust, when the Judaism that I represent, the pre-Holocaust Judaism, is probably at its weakest point in numbers-wise. We have a state of Israel which is completely undermining the concept of pacifist Judaism as it was for the past 1,000 years. Completely undermining that. And yet somehow, in our weakest condition, we're actually in a position of strength. This tiny remnant of scribes and Pharisees are somehow in our position of strength. We're not going to be arrested for telling you this now. Nobody's going to arrest us. Be'ezrat Hashem, nobody's going to come around and knock on the door and grab us and throw us into another Holocaust. But I'm not sure, because you do have somebody with the Department of, Government Efficiency, who did 2 Nazi salutes when at the inauguration of Donald Trump. But I think we're going to get past it. I think we're going to get past it. I think American people are seeing through it already, and they're not going to allow a Nazi to or the Nazi movement or the Aryan nations or this Gnostic Luciferianism, which disguises itself as Christian faith, to take over. I know that they say that the fastest growing religion in the United States of America is Satanism. But still, that doesn't mean that it's big. It may be fastest growing, but it doesn't mean it's very big. It just is growing, that's all. But hopefully, the more we learn together, the more we explore and explain the origins of the Petach HaMor tradition, the more you will have confidence to identify and clearly, see what we call the armies of Gog, who are on the march right now because they want to destroy this message once and for all. They want to bury it forever, but they will fail. They will fail. And everything goes these days. There's every interpretation of the eschatology, the end of the world, every interpretation of the Antichrist, every interpretation of the false prophet, every interpretation of the whore of Babylon, every interpretation of these beasts is valid, because we live at the time of Gog Magog. At the end of all that, this is the final battle, and all of those different versions are running free now. It's not that one of them is correct; all of them are correct. They're all correct, because every single manifestation of evil that can be manifest is being manifest on the planet right now in every possible way. The armies of Gog Magog are trying to restore every single possible version of what has already been in the past, and what started with this son of Magdalena's son. And that's very difficult for many Christians, especially Roman Catholics, to accept that Mary Magdalene, who they pray to, she's a saint, they love her so much, they pray to her. It's very difficult for them to accept that she was pregnant because she was raped. She was pregnant by a rapist, and that she had a son who grew up to be a wicked person. It's very difficult for them to accept. But if you look at some of the medieval pictures, this is modern day, it's difficult. If you look at the medieval pictures of Mary Magdalene from the Catholic Church, and they always show her as pregnant. They also show her covered in hair. She's very hairy, and they show her pregnant. So it was something which was in the minds. Everybody knew that 500 years ago, 400 years ago, but now suddenly nobody knows this. Something which has gone out of our consciousness. Well, this is on purpose. It's not accidental. They want you to forget all this. But, you know, we've almost run out of time again, and I've got to go. So hopefully we will get into a little bit more about this in the future. I would love you to send me some questions about this. And I hope to bring up some more passages from Judaic tradition about the same thing we've been speaking about all the time. Which will help clarify and shed some light upon biblical understanding. Thank you so much. We have my address is popped up on screen there, peter.chamor@gmail.com. And you are very welcome to send me any questions you have, you would like me to clarify. Send an email, sorry, to peterchamor@gmail.com, and I would love to get into that with you and explain it more. But I've got to go. So I wish you until next time every blessing. God bless you all. Thank you for listening. Take care and shalom. Bye-bye.
If you missed today's show or want to watch it again or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lambnetwork.tv, where you will find this show and all other live Lamb Show archives in the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell somebody about the Messianic Lamb Network.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugi, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.